On the morning of May 14, 1997, a white pickup truck rolled slowly up a narrow gravel lane outside Dunlap, Sequatchie County, Tennessee, stopping beside a weathered mailbox that still carried the faded name Brooks Farm in chipped black paint. The driver climbed out, unfolded a county survey map, and stared across 63 acres of rocky hillside where neat purple rows stretched farther than anyone expected. He looked twice. Then he laughed. Not because the field looked ugly. Because he knew exactly what had been planted there. "Lavender," he muttered, shaking his head. "In Tennessee." 3 neighboring farmers standing beside the fence laughed with him. One slapped the top rail. Another removed his cap and wiped tears from his eyes. The oldest among them finally said, "She spent every penny she had chasing flowers." Across the field, the woman they were laughing at never looked up. She kept guiding an old 1952 Farmall Super M, its 4-cylinder gasoline engine settling into the slow, steady rhythm that had echoed across this valley for more than 4 decades. The faded red paint had long surrendered to rust around the wheel hubs, yet every movement remained deliberate, every gear changed smooth, every pass perfectly straight. At 70 years old, Eleanor Brooks drove as though the tractor was simply another part of her own body. She didn't wave. She didn't argue. She simply kept planting. That silence bothered people more than any angry reply ever could. Because silence leaves room for doubt. And nobody in Sequatchie County believed Eleanor Brooks had anything worth believing. Let me tell you about Eleanor Brooks. She had never planned to become a lavender farmer. She had spent 47 years raising beef cattle alongside her husband, Samuel Brooks, on land Samuel's father purchased in 1951 for $18,600 after returning from military service in Europe. The hills were steep, covered with limestone shelves that broke plows and dulled blades faster than any black prairie soil ever could. Most farmers accepted mediocre pasture and moved on. Samuel never complained. He simply worked harder. When he bought the Farmall Super M from Johnson Farm Equipment in Chattanooga during the spring of 1953, he paid $2,050, including a 2-bottom International Harvester plow and rear cultivator. The tractor produced roughly 44 belt horsepower, enough to pull heavy implements across hills where lighter machines struggled for traction. Samuel used to say something Eleanor never forgot. A machine isn't valuable because it's new. It's valuable because it remembers. Every dent carried a season. Every worn pedal carried another harvest. Every oil stain meant another year the family survived. When Samuel died quietly in his sleep during October 1994, many assumed the farm would soon follow him. The cattle market had weakened. Equipment prices climbed. Property developers from Chattanooga had already started buying hillsides for vacation cabins. People whispered Eleanor would eventually sell. Instead, she sold every cow. That decision shocked the county. Selling cattle meant abandoning nearly half a century of work. Neighbors couldn't understand it. Banks certainly couldn't. Neither could Travis McNeil. At 38 years old, Travis represented everything modern agriculture admired. He held a university degree in agricultural economics, worked with the Tennessee Extension Service, and specialized in helping struggling farms become profitable again. Numbers rarely lied. Experience sometimes did. At least, that was his philosophy. When county records showed Eleanor had applied for permits to establish one of Tennessee's largest commercial lavender fields, Travis assumed paperwork had been filed incorrectly. Nobody planted 40 acres of lavender in Sequatchie County. Nobody. Especially not a 70-year-old widow. He requested a meeting. Eleanor agreed. The conversation took place beneath an old white oak beside the equipment shed while the Farmall cooled nearby, ticking softly as metal contracted in the spring air. Travis unfolded several charts. Soil reports. Market forecasts. Climate averages. Everything pointed toward failure. Lavender belongs in places like Provence, he explained patiently. Or parts of Oregon. Not here. Eleanor listened. She nodded politely. Then she asked one question. Did you walk my hillside before making those charts? Travis hesitated. No. You should. He smiled politely. I don't need to. She smiled back. I thought you might say that. Nothing more. Meeting finished. No argument. No raised voices. Only silence. That silence irritated Travis all afternoon. Because confidence without explanation often feels like stubbornness. And stubborn farmers usually lost everything. Word spread quickly. Within days, the local feed mill had transformed Eleanor's decision into entertainment. Coffee cups stopped halfway to smiling mouths whenever someone mentioned lavender. Men leaned against pickup beds offering opinions nobody had requested. You can't eat flowers. Bees won't pay the mortgage. Maybe tourists will buy perfume. Laughter followed every sentence. The loudest came during the Saturday Farmers' Supply auction outside Dunlap. Nearly 80 people gathered beneath the open pavilion while equipment changed hands. Someone spotted Eleanor parking her Farmall near the edge of the crowd. Conversation slowed. Travis happened to be standing nearby. One farmer grinned broadly. "Mrs. Brooks," he called loudly enough for everyone to hear, "when those flowers don't work out, we'll let you pasture goats on our place." The crowd chuckled. Another shouted, "Better yet, open a flower shop." More laughter. Then Travis laughed too. Not cruelly. Not maliciously. Just confidently. The kind of laugh shared by someone absolutely certain reality would soon prove him correct. People noticed. The laughter grew louder. Several pointed toward Eleanor's tractor. Someone joked they should repaint it purple. Another pretended to smell imaginary perfume drifting across the auction yard. Even the auctioneer paused, smiling. Every eye settled on Eleanor Brooks. She climbed carefully from the Farmall, removed her worn leather gloves, brushed a little dust from one sleeve, looked across the crowd without anger, without embarrassment, without hurry. Finally she spoke. "I hope every one of you comes back next spring." No explanation. No defense. Just one quiet sentence. Then she climbed back onto the tractor, started the engine, and drove away while laughter slowly faded behind her. Let me tell you about that old Farmall before we go any farther. Most people saw faded paint and cracked tires. Eleanor saw Samuel. Every winter, she drained the coolant herself, changed the oil every 100 operating hours, packed fresh grease into every fitting, adjusted the carburetor by ear, and polished the ignition contacts with fine emery cloth kept inside the same wooden toolbox Samuel built in 1956. The tractor never spent a night uncovered unless it was working after dark. Its engine had never been rebuilt because it had never been abused. Like its owners, it survived by refusing to waste strength. By early June, thousands of lavender plants had taken root across the limestone hillside. Then something happened that nobody in Sequatchie County had expected. A black luxury sedan with out-of-state license plates turned slowly through the front gate, and the man who stepped out was carrying a leather briefcase instead of farming gloves. The man closed the sedan door without saying a word for nearly a full minute. Instead, he stood at the edge of the first lavender row, bent down, rubbed a blossom gently between his fingers, and lifted them to his nose. He repeated the motion with another plant 20 feet away. Then another. He wasn't admiring the color. He was judging the scent. Eleanor shut off the Farmall Super M and climbed down slowly. "Morning," she said. The visitor smiled politely. "My name is Victor Delorme. I'm with Maison Delorme Fragrance Laboratories in New York." The name meant nothing to Eleanor. She admitted as much. Victor wasn't surprised. "Our company develops fragrance oils for luxury perfume houses." That sentence meant even less. Eleanor laughed softly. "I've spent my life raising cattle. You'll have to explain it like I'm your grandmother." Victor smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." He reached into his briefcase and removed several small glass bottles, each holding a few drops of pale golden liquid. "Every one of these began in a field like this." He looked across the hillside again. "But not every field smells like yours." Eleanor folded her arms. "What makes mine different? I don't know yet. But I'm determined to find out." News traveled through Sequatchie County faster than summer thunderstorms. Within 48 hours people were talking about the strange man from New York. Some claimed Hollywood was filming nearby. Others insisted Eleanor had rented her land for weddings. The coffee shop conversations became even louder. Probably selling soap. Maybe candles. Nobody gets rich growing flowers. Travis McNeil heard every rumor. He dismissed all of them. One visitor proved nothing. Markets were built on contracts, not curiosity. Still, something bothered him. Victor Delorme had driven nearly 900 miles. Serious businesses rarely wasted that kind of time. 3 days later Travis drove out to Brooks' farm himself. He found Victor walking the hillside carrying sample bags while Eleanor followed behind, answering questions about rainfall, frost dates, limestone outcrops, and drainage patterns. Neither noticed Travis until he spoke. "I thought Perfume came from France." Victor smiled. "A great deal does. But excellent raw material can come from anywhere." He pointed toward the hillside. "This soil interests me." Travis looked unconvinced. "It's just rocky pasture." Victor shook his head. "No. It's fractured limestone with exceptional drainage." He knelt and scooped up a handful of pale brown soil. "You see rocks. I see minerals. Let me tell you about limestone soils for a moment. Lavender hates wet feet. Its roots thrive where water drains quickly and oxygen remains available deep below the surface. Limestone-rich ground often forces plants to work harder for moisture, concentrating aromatic compounds inside the flowers as a natural defense against heat and drought. Farmers usually curse shallow rocky hillsides because corn and soybeans struggle there. Lavender often responds the opposite way. What appears to be poor farmland for one crop can become extraordinary ground for another. The land isn't failing. It's simply waiting for someone to ask the right thing of it. Travis listened carefully. For the first time since meeting Eleanor, certainty began slipping away. Victor requested permission to collect flower samples. Eleanor agreed. Over the next week, he filled labeled paper envelopes from dozens of locations across the farm. North Slope, South Slope, Upper Ridge, Lower Terrace, Morning Harvest, Evening Harvest. Everything was documented. Everything was measured. Before leaving, Victor handed Eleanor a business card. "If laboratory results match what I'm smelling." He paused. "I'll be back." "How long?" 2 weeks. Then he drove away. The waiting proved harder than planting. Every morning Eleanor walked the rows before sunrise. Every evening she checked for weeds by hand. She refused to rush nature. The lavender would bloom when it was ready. Not before. Not after. Meanwhile, Travis couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. He requested university research papers. He read agricultural journals. He discovered small commercial lavender operations in Washington State, Oregon, and Virginia. But Tennessee? Almost nothing. The absence of information felt strangely unsettling. Maybe nobody had failed. Maybe nobody had ever seriously tried. Around the 1,000th hour of fieldwork that summer, Eleanor paused beside the Farmall and looked toward the valley. Have you ever owned something that everyone else called worthless? Something people laughed at before they understood why you kept it? Maybe it wasn't a tractor. Maybe it wasn't land. Maybe it was an idea everyone else dismissed because they judged it before giving it time to grow. Those moments reveal something important. Not about the object. About the people looking at it. Late in June, the laboratory report finally arrived. Victor didn't mail it. He brought it himself. This time another vehicle followed behind his sedan. Then another. 3 visitors climbed out carrying notebooks instead of cameras. One represented a botanical supplier from North Carolina. Another worked for an essential oil distributor in New Jersey. The third introduced herself as a fragrance consultant from California. Eleanor stared in confusion. Victor spread several printed charts across the porch table. I've tested lavender from France, Bulgaria, England, and Oregon. He tapped one column. Your first harvest isn't merely good. He looked directly at Eleanor. It's exceptional. She blinked. I don't know what that means. It means the concentration of linalool acetate is unusually high. And that's important. It's one of the compounds responsible for the soft, sweet floral character luxury perfume makers want most. Silence settled across the porch. Wind moved gently through the blooming rose. Victor finally smiled. I've never seen numbers like these from a first-year commercial field. Travis arrived halfway through the meeting. Nobody invited him. Curiosity did. Victor handed him the report. Travis studied every page. He checked the laboratory seal. Read the chemical analysis twice. Then a third time. Nothing suggested fraud. Nothing suggested exaggeration. Everything suggested Eleanor's hillside had produced something genuinely rare. He looked toward the lavender. Then back at Eleanor. I owe you an apology. She smiled kindly. You don't owe me anything. No. I laughed. So did everyone else. I should have known better. Eleanor shook her head. We're all wrong sometimes. It's what happens afterward that matters. Those words stayed with Travis long after he drove home. For the first time in years, the young agricultural advisor realized education had given him knowledge. But not humility. Within another week, phone calls began arriving almost daily. Small buyers first. Then larger ones. Then exporters. Most wanted samples. Some wanted contracts. A few wanted exclusive rights before the harvest even began. Word was escaping Tennessee, and spreading much farther than anyone realized. Then, on the second Monday of July 1997, Eleanor answered the farmhouse telephone before sunrise. The man on the other end offered to buy her entire crop without ever seeing the field. Before she could answer, a second call came in on the other line. Then a third. By noon, 3 different perfume companies had each demanded exclusive ownership of the very same harvest. And none of them intended to lose it. By Tuesday morning, the quiet farmhouse outside Dunlap no longer felt like a farmhouse. It felt like the center of an auction nobody had planned. The old rotary telephone rang so often that Eleanor finally unplugged it while she carried feed to the chickens. When she plugged it back in an hour later, the line was already ringing again. One company wanted dried flower bundles. Another wanted essential oil. A third wanted the entire harvest before the first bloom had even been cut. Every caller used different words. Every offer climbed higher. Eleanor accepted none of them. She had made one promise to Samuel years earlier. Never sell the first thing you're offered. It had saved them more than once. Now it would save her again. Victor Delorme returned that Friday carrying a thicker briefcase than before. He spread contracts across Eleanor's kitchen table. Each bore the name of a different fragrance company. One represented a boutique perfume house in New York. Another sourced oils for manufacturers in Switzerland. The third supplied ingredients to luxury brands throughout Europe. They're competing now, Victor said quietly. They know about each other. And they all want your lavender. Eleanor looked at the papers but didn't touch them. How much difference is there? Victor hesitated. The highest offer is almost double the lowest. She looked out the kitchen window instead. Rows of purple shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, she turned back. I'll wait. Victor blinked. You understand these offers may disappear. They might. They're already generous. I know. You aren't tempted. Eleanor smiled. I've spent 47 years farming. She rested one hand on the table. Crops teach patience. So did my husband. Victor nodded slowly. He had negotiated contracts for nearly 20 years. Very few growers ever walked away from numbers that large. Fewer still did it calmly. Let me tell you about Samuel Brooks. He believed the most dangerous moment in farming wasn't drought. It wasn't hail. It wasn't low prices. It was the moment someone made you afraid enough to decide too quickly. He often delayed selling cattle for weeks because panic lowered prices faster than markets did. He repaired machinery instead of replacing it because excitement made expensive decisions look sensible. Neighbors called him stubborn. Banks called him cautious. Eleanor simply called him right. Now she was following the same lesson. Outside, the Farmall Super M waited beneath the equipment shed exactly where Samuel had parked it years before. Its faded hood reflected soft streaks of afternoon light. The tractor had now worked 44 seasons without a major engine overhaul. Visitors often asked how that was possible. The answer surprised them. Because it was never rushed. Machines, Eleanor believed, aged the same way people did. Not from honest work. From careless treatment. A week later the lavender reached peak bloom. The hillsides looked almost unreal. Long ribbons of deep violet rolled across pale Tennessee limestone while thousands of honeybees drifted steadily from row to row. Cars began stopping along the county road. Photographers arrived. Garden clubs organized bus trips. Children pointed from passing windows. The same neighbors who had laughed in May now slowed their pickups just to stare. Even Travis found himself speechless. He had driven those roads for years. He had never imagined the hills could look like this. Then the buyers came. Not one. Not three. 8. Luxury sedans parked beside dusty farm trucks. Men in tailored jackets walked carefully through muddy rows wearing borrowed rubber boots. Women carrying leather portfolios crouched beside blossoms, discussing aroma profiles and harvest timing as though every flower contained hidden treasure. One buyer quietly pulled Victor aside. "We'll increase our offer." Another overheard. "So will we." Within an hour, the negotiations had moved from business to competition. Nobody wanted to leave without securing Eleanor's harvest. Because laboratory reports had already begun circulating through the fragrance industry. Her lavender wasn't merely abundant. It was unusual. Its oil carried a balance of floral sweetness and fresh herbal notes rarely found together in commercial production. Every company wanted to claim it first. The bidding continued into evening. Travis watched from the porch. Finally, he leaned toward Eleanor. "I've spent 15 years studying agriculture." She glanced at him. "I've never seen anything like this." She smiled gently. "The land knew." "I didn't." "No, you didn't." There was no triumph in her voice. Only kindness. That hurt far more than being mocked. Because kindness leaves no room for excuses. The next morning, Victor arrived carrying revised contracts. The highest bid had climbed again. Nearly everyone expected Eleanor to sign immediately. Instead, she asked a question no buyer expected. "If I sell to one company?" She looked around the room. "What happens to the others?" Silence. One executive answered honestly. "They lose." She folded her hands. "I don't want that." The buyers exchanged puzzled looks. Victor frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "My field produced enough for more than one family to benefit." She paused. "So why should only one company?" It wasn't how business usually worked. Exclusive contracts created prestige. Scarcity created value. Competition created leverage. Yet Eleanor wasn't interested in winning against someone. She wanted everyone dealing fairly. Hours of negotiation followed. Eventually, a different agreement emerged. The harvest would be divided into carefully measured lots. Several companies would receive supply. Each would pay premium prices. Each would commit to future quality inspections. Each would help expand production if future harvests matched the first. Nobody received everything. Nobody left empty-handed. Victor leaned back after the final signature. "I've negotiated hundreds of contracts." He smiled. "I've never watched a farmer make competitors shake hands." Neither had anyone else. Harvest began during the final week of July. Workers moved carefully through fragrant rows with specialized sickles while bundles were loaded onto flatbed trailers behind the old Farmall. The tractor never hurried. Its steady engine echoed across the hills exactly as it had during hay season decades earlier. Young workers stopped to watch it climb slopes modern utility vehicles avoided. One teenager finally asked Eleanor why she still trusted such an old machine. She rested her hand on the worn steering wheel. "Because it's never lied to me. Let me tell you something about horsepower and torque. People often confuse the two, but they're very different. Horsepower measures how quickly an engine can perform work. Torque measures the twisting force that actually moves a load. Old tractors like the 1952 Farmall Super M weren't designed to race across fields. They produced strong, steady torque at low engine speeds, allowing them to pull heavy wagons without straining every moving part. Modern equipment often boasts far higher horsepower, yet those older cast-iron engines earned loyalty because they delivered their strength patiently, hour after hour. Farmers trusted torque because fields don't reward speed. They reward consistency. By August, the first distilled oil had been shipped. Industry magazines began mentioning Brooks Farm. Agricultural researchers requested soil samples. Even state officials scheduled visits. Sequatchie County had become known for something no one expected. Not cattle. Not tobacco. Lavender. Late one evening, after the final trailer left the drying barn, Travis stood alone beside the quiet Farmall. He ran his fingers across the faded red hood where Samuel's fingerprints had once rested. Then he looked toward Eleanor. Have you ever discovered that the person you doubted had been quietly teaching you all along? Because that realization changes more than your opinion. It changes who you become. Before either of them could speak again, another vehicle turned into the driveway. This one carried officials from the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. And the letter they brought would change the future of Brooks Farm forever. The Tennessee Department of Agriculture officials stepped out carrying clipboards instead of contracts. Their visit had nothing to do with buying lavender. It had everything to do with protecting it. The letter they handed Eleanor confirmed what months of laboratory testing had already suggested. Brooks Farm possessed one of the highest quality commercial lavender crops ever documented in the southeastern United States. State researchers wanted permission to establish a long-term study of the hillside's limestone soil, drainage patterns, and growing conditions. Agricultural universities wanted to understand why this forgotten pasture produced essential oil that fragrance companies considered extraordinary. Eleanor read the letter once. Then she folded it carefully. I suppose Samuel would have smiled. Travis stood nearby. He'd probably say he told us so. She laughed softly. No. He'd simply tell us the land did exactly what it was always capable of doing. The study began that autumn. So did something else. Farmers who had once mocked Eleanor now started knocking on her front door. Not to laugh. To learn. One wanted advice about growing herbs on rocky ground. Another asked whether abandoned tobacco acreage might support lavender. A third wondered how to improve soil drainage instead of fighting it. Eleanor welcomed every one of them. She never mentioned the laughter. Never reminded them what they had said. She walked each visitor across the hillside with the same patience Samuel had once shown young neighbors learning to repair machinery. She answered every question. She shared every lesson. Because knowledge, she believed, became more valuable when it was given away. Travis visited almost every Saturday. At first he came with notebooks. Eventually he stopped bringing them. He realized the most important lessons couldn't be written quickly. They had to be watched, experienced, remembered. One crisp October afternoon, he finally asked the question that had stayed with him since May. When everyone laughed. He paused. Weren't you angry? Eleanor looked across the purple rose now fading toward winter. I was disappointed, but not surprised. Why? Because people usually laugh at things they haven't taken time to understand. She bent down and picked up a small piece of pale limestone. This rock spent millions of years becoming what it is. She turned it slowly in her hand. I couldn't expect people to understand it in 5 minutes. Those words stayed with Travis longer than any agricultural textbook he had ever read. The following spring, Brooks Farm expanded by another 12 acres. Not because Eleanor wanted to become wealthy. Because demand continued growing. The companies that had competed so fiercely the previous year all returned. This time they arrived with respect instead of confidence. Instead of arguing over price alone, they discussed long-term partnerships. Some invested in improved distillation equipment. Others funded research into sustainable production. One even helped establish scholarships for agricultural students interested in specialty crops throughout Tennessee. Victor Delorme returned every harvest. The first time he walked through the expanded fields, he stopped beside the old Farmall Super M. I visited lavender farms across 3 continents. He rested his hand gently on the tractor's faded hood. I've never seen one where the machine tells as much of the story as the flowers. Eleanor smiled. It belonged to my husband. I know. It still feels like it does. The Farmall continued working. Not because Eleanor couldn't afford something newer. Because it still started every morning. Every winter she repeated the same maintenance routine Samuel had followed decades earlier. Fresh oil. Greased bearings. Adjusted valves. Clean fuel. Shelter from rain. Young mechanics often offered to restore it completely. She always refused. Those scratches belong there. They're part of its memory. Let me tell you about legacy. People often imagine legacy as something grand, a monument, a fortune, a famous name carved into stone. Farmers understand it differently. Legacy is a gate that still swings properly because someone oiled the hinges for 40 years. It's a field that produces better crops because someone resisted the temptation to exhaust it. It's a tractor that still starts because every small repair was made before it became a large one. Real legacy isn't built in a single season. It's assembled quietly through thousands of ordinary days when nobody is watching. 5 years passed. By 2002, several neighboring farms had begun growing lavender on land once considered nearly worthless. Sequatchie County hosted its first regional lavender festival. Local bed and breakfasts filled with visitors each summer. Small family distilleries appeared. Young farmers who had once planned to leave the county decided to stay. The hills themselves had not changed. Only the way people looked at them. Travis changed too. He eventually became Director of Regional Agricultural Development. Whenever new farmers asked for advice, he rarely began with spreadsheets. Instead, he loaded them into his pickup and drove them to Brooks' farm. Standing beside the limestone hillside, he would tell the same story. I once laughed here. I was wrong. Don't make the same mistake. Every time he admitted it, the lesson became stronger. Victor kept his promise as well. Maison Delorme never demanded exclusivity. The company honored Eleanor's decision to share her harvest among several buyers. In return, Brooks' farm became known throughout the fragrance industry not only for exceptional lavender but for exceptional integrity. Business magazines wrote about contracts. Agricultural journals wrote about soil. Perfume makers praised the oil. But those who visited remembered something else. They remembered the quiet woman who never hurried, never boasted, never sought revenge against the people who doubted her. In the winter of 2011, after a light snowfall covered the Tennessee hills, Eleanor Brooks passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84. Her daughter, Claire Brooks Harrison, inherited the farm. The first thing Claire did that spring was unlock the equipment shed. She walked straight to the Farmall Super M. Checked the oil, opened the fuel valve, pulled the choke, pressed the starter. The old engine hesitated once, then settled into the same familiar rhythm Samuel had first heard nearly 60 years earlier. Visitors standing outside smiled. Some wiped away quiet tears. Because certain sounds carry people back across generations. Every lavender season afterward, Claire parked the Farmall at the edge of the first blooming field before harvest began. Not as decoration. As a reminder. Children asked why such an old tractor still mattered. She always answered the same way. Because everything beautiful here began behind that steering wheel. Years later, Travis attended another county gathering beneath the same auction pavilion where laughter had once echoed across the crowd. This time he stood before young farmers beginning their own journeys. He pointed toward the distant hills. I used to think success meant knowing all the answers. He smiled. Now I think success begins the day you admit the land may know something you don't. Nobody laughed. They simply listened. The hillside that people once called useless had become one of the county's greatest teachers. The widow they once pitied had become the person they quoted. The tractor they once considered obsolete still carried harvests each July. And the fragrance that drifted across those Tennessee hills reminded everyone that the richest opportunities are often rooted in the places the world overlooks. Some things never ask to be believed. They simply keep growing until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. If you've ever known someone who quietly proved everyone wrong, or if you've held onto an old tool, an old machine, or an old dream long after others told you to let it go, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Those are the stories that deserve to be remembered. And if you'd like to hear about the elderly farmer in western Kansas who refused to scrap his grandfather's 1948 John Deere Model A, only for that forgotten tractor to uncover a secret buried beneath 80 acres of wheat, you'll want to be here for the next story.